We have with us Leshno, who is a professor at Chicago Booth, and he's going to talk to us about consensus. So let's give it up, Jacob.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't do anything yet. Yeah, so very happy to be here. Full disclosure, I'm an economist, but this is joint work with two computer scientists that you may know, Elaine and Michelle Foss. And the point of this work is to kind of ask, as an economist, like we have this permissionless consensus technology, what properties that are useful to an economist can it deliver? What are the limitations of the design space? Let's translate the design space into what we can do with it. So let me start from like one question that's maybe in your mind, maybe not, but when you try to explain blockchain to economists, they would ask, why do we care? Why do we need blockchain? They say, oh, you can make payments and all those things. We can make payments anyway, make payments with a lot of other methods. But the methods that we do have some problems that economists are concerned about. The most prominent one of which, aside of sort of lack of technological updating that may be more solvable, more inherent problem is that all the known technologies before blockchain for doing payment processing, or what I would call financial rails, are reliant on a centralized authority that gets a lot of power, and with a lot of power, you get a lot of pricing power, and that brings antitrust concerns. So here are some like numbers, like there's a McKinsey report. You'd say this number is from a McKinsey report. This is a staggeringly large number that goes to payment processors. It's not McKinsey is not completely clear whether it's what's considered in this report. At least I wasn't able to discern what McKinsey includes in this number. But this is a staggeringly large amount of money that goes to payment processors, and as computer scientists, you should be looking at this and maybe have a better assessment than me whether this is actually the cost of doing processing payments. My estimate as an economist is this is not a reflection of the cost of making transactions, but rather the market power that enables payment processors to charge a markup. So why payments are not a competitive market? Why are they able to charge more than it costs to make it? Well, Visa has strong network effects. The reason that you go with Visa is because you know that merchants accept Visa. The reason that merchants accept Visa is because customers have Visa cards. That creates an egg and chicken problem for anybody who tries to compete with Visa. Competing with Visa is very hard. There's a strong network effect that gives Visa a lot of pricing power, and the subsequent a lot of antitrust regulation, litigation, and all sort of concerns. Yeah? Okay, so we have some issues with the system now. What does blockchain do differently? So we can think of the current system as one company controls a set of computers, provides a service to customers, but has like the power to set prices, control the system. In contrast, you can think of the blockchain protocols as setting an intermediate layer that connects users to service providers. And as the first step, think of Uber and Lyft. Instead of using the train station, only the train company can provide the trains. Now with Uber and Lyft, everybody can be a driver. So if you want to be a Bitcoin miner, you can do that within a day. You can buy something off Amazon that will give you an ASIC that will be even give you a mild chance of being successful, but you can do this on your laptop, maybe not very efficiently, but you can be part of the Bitcoin infrastructure if you want to. And it actually goes a step further than Uber and Lyft. Not just everybody can be a driver, but there's also a layer between that sets up the rules of the market, which is open source and fixed. So nobody has discretion of setting prices for the miners. Uber can say, oh, we changed the payment to the drivers. There's no entity that can do a similar policy decision in the blockchain protocols we're interested in. It's more like we all decide to come and meet in the city square on Tuesday afternoon. Everybody comes on Tuesday afternoons, and it's set by convention. Okay, so what do we get from that? You get some sort of competition maybe between the service providers, and maybe that's a more beneficial market structure for the users. In a previous paper with Gur Huberman and Siamak Moalemi, we analyzed the market structure that is implied by Bitcoin structure and found that it actually gives competitive transaction fees. The strong kind of version of this claim is that even if you're a miner that controls 40% of the mining of the hash power, then you cannot set prime transaction fees. It's not going to be profitable to you to say from now on, transaction fees that users are paying need to be at least $10. And that's not going to be profitable because of the potential entry from new miners.
What threshold is this?
It's true at any threshold. The problem is when you go about 50%, like free entry becomes kind of less reliable because you can censor other miners. But like as long as free entry is possible, if you tell users pay higher transaction fees, you'll increase the overall pool of transaction fees, and entry will dilute you, resulting in unprofitable change volume. And you can see empirically that's a slide from the model that just shows what would competitive transaction fee look in a model where the horizontal axis is congestion, how much demand there is for the blockchain, and you can see that the dots pretty much track the theoretical model. In practice, fees on blockchains are competitive. We don't see any operators of blockchains say this is how much you need to pay to use Ethereum, or this is how much we decided that you should use to pay for Bitcoin. Those are all market driven. Yeah. One analogy for that, another analogy for that is Wi-Fi. So there's a committee that sets like the Wi-Fi standard and then releases it, and those many operators, all of them can make interchangeable or almost interchangeable commoditized Wi-Fi products. So you may really care about having Wi-Fi, but it's easy to do, and there's many different options to buy Wi-Fi products, making Wi-Fi accessible, widespread, and relatively cheap. Yeah, so that's kind of like free entry is a very good thing economically. So that's kind of like the main property of blockchains that I think, as an economist, I'm interested in and would like to push forward. But the decentralized structure, this free entry structure that we have from Bitcoin, has very natural tension with security. So we try to take this point and ask, okay, can we take this decentralized structure and design financial rails, payment system that JP Morgan and your aunt and Bank of America will all kind of like use? First thing that came to our mind is like there's a challenge that there's security issues in all those open systems. We know a bunch of issues with the security of Bitcoin or like permissionless protocols, and those seem to be somewhat inherent because if you allow the protocol to be open, you essentially allow the operators to be anybody, including the attacker can spin up attackers. Yeah? And we do have a lot of results about like the safety of blockchains, but again, like I want a property that's going to be more economical. I want to say if you're a user of the system, I want to give you a property saying that it's secure from the things that you know. You may not even know that you're sending payments on a blockchain, but you may still want to have a guarantee without knowing what's under the hood. Yeah. So I'll be a bit more concrete and kind of try to formalize all of this. Of course, I'm going to go through a consensus model, but I'm going to kind of push it in directions where my at least economic intuition says like are the interesting properties. So I'm going to try to combine economic perspective with a distributed system model that goes to the design space, yeah, and try to get some economic meaningfulness. Yeah.
So, what kind of security issues are we referring to in the previous slides about this?
Double spend attack. That's out.
So it's not about like phishing, that kind of concern.
Yeah, so I'm not gonna think about phishing. The main thing I'm gonna think about is basically corrupt majority attacks.
So consensus level safety.
Yeah. Yeah, phishing attacks will, there's some connection to phishing attacks, and that's a good question to have, so maybe I'll circle back to that. Yeah. So, the first thing that I will go over very quickly is that the current design, longest chain protocol that Bitcoin adopts, or standard proof of work protocols use, perform pretty badly in those metrics. So we have safety and liveness under honest majority, but honest majority is completely endogenous. And as an economist, I will ask, what's the cost of breaking the honest majority? And the cost seems to be very small. And the key problem is that if you can't attack attacks on Bitcoin, well, cannot really prevent them, you cannot punish the attackers, the attacks will not be punished. So we thought that initially that we may be getting an impossibility result here, but we ended up getting something much closer to impossibility result that takes the consensus protocol, Nakamoto's consensus protocol, in terms of the knowledge that it established on this chart. And instead of giving you a hand wavy high level thing, I'll properly define it later. Let me just say that we do need to make some assumptions within the protocol for safety and mostly for most strongly for liveness, which gets us to model the community. That we want to use the fact that this protocol is not existing in the void. It's a protocol that must be in some sense supported by some other entity. And we think that the other protocol measures are important to model. So long literature with slides, a lot more paper that should be going here. Main thing is like there's a literature in economics, there's literature in computer science, we try to connect. Yeah. More relevant literature, very relevant here. So let me start by trying to give you some motivating slides for trying to explain how an economist, how I think about what the safety means for user. And basically I'm going to motivate here why I think consistency is the property that we should focus on. So let's think of trying to implement a payment system. Implementing a payment system is getting a system that has the following properties. You have some ability to track balances. Everybody can see their balances at any point in time, and those balances update via transactions. And transactions are valid if and only if they can prove that the transaction actually has sufficient balance. I can only send $50 if I do have $50 or 50 units of whatever. And second, I should not be able to send $50 from my account. A BID should not be allowed to send $50 from my account without my authorization. If you have a system that tracks balances and updates them according to transaction that satisfy those conditions, I would say this is a payment system. This is an implementation of a payment system. And the key point of the slide is that all you need to do this is an append on the ledger and basically complete recovery. You make a transfer, just write I'm owner of X, I want to transfer to Y, some amount S. Here's my signature of the transaction. You just keep appending those to a ledger. That's an implementation of a payment system. You can track that every transaction has sufficient balance because the ledger just tracks all the balances. And you can verify the signatures to see that everything is authorized by users. If anything is written to the append ledger that's illegal, just ignore it. So this is an implementation of append ledger. So the key difficulty in implementing a payment system is just getting the append ledger. So that's what Bitcoin is actually solving. Bitcoin is getting the append ledger. Some of the slides are more for computer scientists, more for when I present to economists, so I'm guessing everybody knows this. So the key challenge is, can we get an independent ledger, which is the core challenge of distributed systems. We have now a collection of different nodes that all have their own local copies. Can we make sure that all those local copies agree? Classical distributed systems, you should do this because your computers may fail. Here I'm going to add another reason. As an economist, I not only think that computers may fail, but I don't want to have power over the system. I want to make all of them exchangeable. Yeah. So protocol, just basically an instruction for all the nodes what to do, given the local view. I'm gonna assume that I have an attacker that can spend some arbitrary resources. I'm gonna think of the cost of the attacker rather than a limitation on the number of nodes. So the cost will be specified by the model. And the nodes, the execution model that I'm assuming for the nodes is synchrony with late joiners. And implicitly, I'm going to assume echoing also. I'm not going to distinguish users and consensus nodes. I'm going to think of the end user as operating the consensus node. I'm going to assume synchrony and complete echoing. So if node I receives some message at some time, either every other node must receive it either up to delta before or up to delta. Late joiners are going to be an important part of the system if I want to think of a system that's open and allows for pre-entry. So late joiners, nodes that start the protocol at the middle of the execution are going to be essential. And they're going to be tricky for a bunch of the results. The main thing that's tricky about them is they don't get reliable timestamps about any message that was sent before they joined. One thing that I want to emphasize now and will become important later is that they do need to learn setup information. For example, what is Genesis block? And I will think about where do they get the setup information from? And they must be getting the setup information from outside of protocol. That's what I'm gonna make an assumption that differs from the standard assumptions of the Okay, so I want to get protocol that will have consistency and liveness. And if you go to end user and say, well, I guarantee consistency, it basically says there's no deception. So why did I go through the definition of a payment system to begin with? The main reason that you should be able to is that an attacker may be able to fraud or deceive a merchant or a user is by breaking consistency. Because all the computations that that are done, except for maintaining consistency, are very simple. Like you cannot break the signatures, you cannot break the ledger. So basically, the thing that we should be worried about for the attacker is indeed breaking consistency. Not completely sure how phishing attacks fall into this classification, but let me kind of leave this to think about it online. That's you.
No, I was asking since deceiving makes me think it may have to do with like phishing, but I realize now you mean yeah.
I think there may be some relation there, but I'm assuming that like the merchant is a merchant that's well informed. Like you got a payment terminal from Square. Square will tell you your payment terminal has to follow the following execution to verify transaction. If you do that, then I guarantee your transactions.
Exactly.
Why would it fail? I'm assuming that you will be correct in checking the signatures. But the main point of failure is like that your local ledger, your local log may differ from the local log that we have. Yeah. So here's the point of all of this. The definition that I'm going to use for economic security, or how I'm going to think of economic security, is that security is essentially given by consistency. And there's going to be an attacker that attempts to violate consistency. And I'm going to ask, how costly is it for the attacker to violate consistency? So very close to the standard kind of like the standard way that you will define it in a distributed systems model. One distinction is that the honest majority is completely endogenous. So it's not like saying this protocol is safe under honest majority does not really answer whether it's secure or not, because I don't know whether that hacker can accumulate enough nodes to break the honest majority. And if you can break the protocol when you have corrupt majority, the question is just how costly is it to do? Vice versa, if you give the user this definition, you say, well, somebody can break the protocol, but they'll have to pay $100,000 to do so. And now, if I'm a bank and I only transfer $10,000 at a time, I know I'm relatively safe. Okay. So, double spam attacks are of course consistency violations, but you can also think of like just rewriting history. You can make a bet with somebody else, wait till the event happens, and then decide whether I take the bet or not. That's the most consistent. Okay, so now let's see how Bitcoin's the Nakamoto protocol does under the definition. So there's no need to go through this protocol, right? Yeah. So we know that under network-aware honest majority, like we have consistency and liveness. So this is from like this graph is from Passive and Charlotte. But you really do need the synchrony assumption. Without synchrony, Nakamoto fails. And one kind of like simple example of this is that if we have a partition network, Nakamoto protocol basically says both partition parts should just keep on making the chain. And once the partition gets resolved, just take the longest chain. And when I show this to economists, they're kind of like thinking that this is crazy. And I think this is completely crazy, right? Because if you have any financial system and you have any scenario in which you're not sure whether the transaction will eventually get posted or not, don't post it. What's the benefit to those users to having some of those transactions finalized only to get reverted afterwards? You don't get any benefit from the transaction unless you can withdraw the money. So those users are harmed, and they don't benefit from any liveness guarantees here, because the liveness guarantees here are meaningless. The liveness guarantee that you want is like that. It's only liveness in the sense that the money will be available to me when I need it. Otherwise, don't kind of like take it away from me. Yeah, so this is, I would say, already pretty bad. Yeah.
So when the transactions get overwritten in the second case, where does the money go, so to speak?
The money goes back to the initial. So like customer comes to a merchant, says, I wanna, like, I don't know, you go to a gas station, the gas station doesn't have like internet connection. Come with a credit card and say, I want to pay to the gas. They say, oh, we don't have connection. We don't know whether the transaction that you pay with the credit will go through or not. No. Tomorrow the customer will not be there anymore. May not be collecting the money. And you don't really care if your terminal now says like, oh, the transaction processed. If the $50 will not be in the account tomorrow, it doesn't help you that your terminal said like, you know, the terminal is happy. So maybe I should sometimes emphasize this more, that like when you do a transaction, the only thing you care about is whether others acknowledge it. And so for financial data, I think consistency is really essential. It's the core kind of, it's the only reasonable meaning to having processed transaction, getting everybody else to agree that the transaction actually gives you a balance. Yeah. Okay, so reverting transaction is really bad here, but it's actually in some sense worse because not only this is allowed to happen under Nakamoto, under a very extreme weird scenario, it actually allows attackers to pretend to be partitioned and do this attack. So you can think of all the double spend attacks as essentially the attacker pretends to be disconnected. And if you try to rationalize why is Nakamoto susceptible to double spend attacks? Well, it's not because the protocol design was stupid, it's because it tried to be resilient to disagreements with the different nodes, whether different nodes have different views of the chain, you want to reconcile the views. But the method that was used to reconcile it susceptible to an adversary pretending to create such a bad scenario. And not only this is problematic because it can violate consistency, this is really problematic from an economic perspective because the attack is in a sense costless. And so there's kind of the paper has a bit of a formalism, which is just saying like that, think of the nodes as renting hashes. So every node can compute as many hashes as they want, they just pay cost per hash. And in this model, try to compute what is the cost for the attacker. Well, the cost is just building enough hashes to create all those blocks. But if I was an honest miner, I would also have to pay the same cost to compute all those blocks. And if my chain is the longest chain, then everybody considers me as the honest miner. This is the chain. So despite malicious intents and the consistency violations that's created, the attacker is treated exactly like an honest miner. And because honest miners are compensated for their efforts, the miners is also compensated for their efforts. Not only they don't get punished, they actually get compensated. So this is really bad. Right? Like this is kind of inherent in the protocol. If you can't detect that this is malicious and this is honest, then you can't impose punishment on the entities that created this rather than this. Yeah. So next question that comes to mind, it's something that's practically widespread is, well, maybe we can detect that this is malicious. Maybe this is a problem with the model. Maybe the model is forgetting about all sort of important realistic things. And one kind of extreme version of this is that the attacker essentially hacked into the bank's computer, changed the balance in the account, but left a sticky note for the clerk the next morning to say, this is what I hacked, those are the accounts I changed. And this is, if you think about it this way, this is a very bizarre hack. Because you didn't do anything. You changed the numbers overnight just for the clerk tomorrow morning to see, oh, somebody hacked into the computer. Let's just change the numbers back. If you take the view that this is completely observable, we can see that those are attack blocks. Well, the solution is very simple. Just ignore that. And then the attacker spent all this money to create these blocks and he achieved nothing. So one kind of comment is like that if we have some kind of attack like that, the community can just resolve this. Maybe the nodes themselves can be tricked. The verbatim definition of the protocol is really insufficient. But the community will be able to just resolve all those problems and do a hard fork to avert the chain back. And while this is not without precedent, there's a lot of follow-up questions to this too. Because maybe in this case, it's actually pretty simple to detect the attack. Yeah? So if you assume synchrony, which is pretty reasonable to assume here, then any online node at the time will see all those blocks appearing in those timestamps. So plus minus delta. Let's say delta is one time unit. Yeah? And then at some later time, 60, you see a bunch of blocks arriving. And this assumption that the community will be able to detect the attack is actually seems pretty correct. It's like, as any online node would be able to see that those blocks were either mined by a partition miner in some like tropical island that somehow had 50% of the hash rate and lost connectivity for the last like, however minutes, yeah? Oh, there's an attacker that did an attack.
When you say node here, you mean miners, right?
What?
What a node here is only referring to miners, right?
So I'm using node and miner synonymous.
Yeah, okay, got it.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Yeah. So obviously there wasn't 50% of the hash rate that just got partitioned over the last kind of like few hours. Yeah? This is any evasion would tell you this is an attack, it should just be ignored.
What if the attacker for each honest block would publish, just the equivalent one?
Yeah, so I think that's the next thing. So we can maybe address this kind of pretty blunt attack, but if you wanna argue the protocol is secure, well, maybe you want a stronger argument than this, right? Because now we want to think about more general attacks, other forms of attacks that may take a main point. And also, you may want to think about the capability of the community overall to achieve basically consensus. Because another kind of problem with this argument is if you hand wave and say, well, the community will be able to solve it, and here's some arguments. Well, why can't the community just achieve consensus to begin with? And why do we need the blockchain if the community can reach agreements? A bit more formalism here, what the community can and cannot do, I think will be helpful. Yeah. I do want to say, although, that's like, I think this kind of argument does seem to have some merit. Very anecdotally, you can look at the distinction between Ethereum and Ethereum Classic. So Ethereum very prominently has very strong community. Yeah, Vitalik is let's say if Ethereum proof of work were ever to be attacked, you'd expect Vitalik to be on Twitter within like 7 minutes. Maybe 7 minutes is too much. And the community can coalesce and come to some sort of agreement. But certainly, Ethereum Classic, in contrast, said like that the protocol verbatim is what we should actually implement. There should not be any external intervention from the community, and that makes it attackable, and it was attacked. So, very anecdotal evidence, consistent. And of course, there's many other deterrents to attacks. Right? The paper goes through a couple of models saying that it's kind of hard to justify the security of the Nakamoto protocol under reasonable assumptions, under reasonable modeling assumptions. But there could be other reasons that are outside of the model that explain why you don't get attacked. Problem with most of those things is that they also argue that Bitcoin is not really decentralized. For example, if you think that the attacker, the lack of attacks is due to the legal enforcement against the attacker, well, why do we need protection within the Bitcoin level? Yeah. Okay, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna design a variation of the Nakamoto protocol that's basically gonna try to bake in the community response. Try to get finality with it. So first kind of design objective is that we want a protocol that's consistent. Nakamoto is designed to be, in some sense, live first, consistent second. That does not seem like the right choice for financial infrastructure. We should do something that's consistent first. If you can't guarantee consistency, you should lose liveness, because liveness is not going to be useful unless you can guarantee consistency. I don't want to say the transaction got approved unless the bank account will actually get updated and people can withdraw the money. Yeah. And then can think of trying to create a protocol that has this community response into the protocol. And the important part of it is establishing agreement. So the Bitcoin protocol does very little to actually tell you what is the possible view of other nodes. We're going to try to be careful in the design of the protocol to enable the community agreement by tying the view of different nodes. Like every node will have much more knowledge about what are the possible states of other nodes. I'm going to try to be careful. Which is essentially basic distributed systems principle. So how are we going to be able to achieve a protocol that has decent properties? Well, first we can do conflict detection. I'm gonna set up an explicit finality rule, basically saying how deep you need to be to get finality. That should be explicit within the protocol. Once I'm explicit about this, I can also detect what are the possible scenarios in which somebody else may have finalized something. And the first step in the protocol is conflict detection, enabling online nodes to halt when they see that it may have been possible for some other online node to finalize something that's conflicting. Once I have this, I have a protocol that's going to be fully consistent for online nodes and maybe halt. And I want to do two things, of course. One, I want to have recovery. If I regain honest majority or regain some conditions, and now it's safe again to process transactions, I want to keep doing this. I don't want the protocol to just die once and that's it. And the second thing, I need to allow for late joiners. And I do those two things together with something that we call recovery oracle that captures some out of protocol help, which I see as modeling the community. So you have a conflict, you need to get some resolution. We have a possibility resolved without some out of protocol input, but we'll show that with some out of protocol input that I think is plausible, you can actually achieve something that's something that has desirable properties. And of course, I'm going to be worried about whether this is indeed feasible. I don't want to assume that the community can just solve consensus. I should not allow the community or this entity that I call the recovery oracle to have excessive power over the protocol. I'll be worried about that too. But I'll design a protocol to make this feasible and something that has very little power over the protocol and used readily, if any, ideally. And I would argue that this is actually a reasonable assumption because when you don't allow this, you get some impossible result that seems too strong. Okay, so yeah, I'm doing a lot of hand waving. Let me just show you the protocol.
Would the delay to detect potential conflicts necessarily slow the network down?
Not much, but here's the here's the idealized kind of like behavior that they want. I want like both miners to go and run something like Nakamoto. At time 60, they get to see that this is KD. K is a parameter of the protocol. So both of them finalize after some 2 delta delay. And some later time, an attack chain comes in that conflicts with some block that was finalized. And I want miner A to be able to just ignore that because miner A knows that miner B will also ignore the same. And the crucial part is establishing the knowledge of miner A that miner D will ignore that too. And you can think of this as baking in the community response instead of miner A and B kind of going back to the community and saying, oh, let's choose those 2 blocks and say, no, I know what the community will agree on. I finalize this. I know that everybody in the community will say that this finalized block is the correct block. Everything else is going to be ignored. So instead of halting, going on Twitter, agreeing and coming back, I just know the backwards induction. I know what we'll decide on Twitter. And we don't actually need to go on Twitter because we all know that we agree that this is the block that we're going to go. Okay. I'm gonna use synchrony pretty happily. Tell me if you think it's reasonable. Like from what I see, a lot of financial systems basically say this is how we make our system safe. You actually need to call the bank to ask whether the transaction went through. So this is an excerpt from Square's online website saying that if you're using them at the farmer's market and you're not connected to the internet, you can reach us. We'll try to do cards, but can't do it without synchrony, partial synchrony, or partition agents. Okay, so here's a protocol. The really important things is just parts 1 and 2, and then I have like another couple of stages to make recovery a bit smoother, nicer. Just add additional unnecessary steps. Let me start from condition 1. So when Nakamoto finalizes the block, we say this block is certified. And then we'll have some other steps. But this, I keep the structure as Nakamoto, but instead of finalizing when you got the block to be 6 deep, I say you're certified now. Let's wait a certain delay, and then we'll have another step to find out. So it's, I would say it's certified if a block is K deep, where K is a parameter of the protocol. All nodes must use the same level K, the same depth K. And I would say that the node gamma potentially certified a block if it's K deep in a chain that would have been longest gamma time ago. Yeah. And the gamma potentially certified is the definition they use to track knowledge of other nodes. Yeah, so think of minor I. They see this arrangement of blocks. They receive this last blue block at time t. They receive this last blue block at time tau. Is it possible that suppose k is equal to 3? Is it possible? So suppose k is equal to 2. Is it possible that somebody that's minor j finalized this block? Well, I know that minor j saw the same blocks as me, but maybe with a delay of up to delta, maybe tau plus minus delta, t plus minus delta. Therefore, I'm not completely sure whether he certified this block or not. Therefore, and that's why I use the gamma potentially certified. I have those guarantees. If I certify the block, then any other honest node, 2 delta potentially certified the same block, a delta time later. So the symmetric information due to the lags would say, I'm not sure that they actually certify the same block that I did, but I'm sure that they 2 delta potentially certified this after a bit of. Okay. More generally, if you gamma potentially certify the block, then any honest node, gamma plus 2 delta potentially certify the block, delta time later. A bit tricky to write, like the proof is checking. Yeah.
What's the assumption about these any other honest node? I mean, they may not be connected, right? They might not have it.
So I'm assuming I call a node honest if it follows the protocol and has synchrony. So if you lost your connectivity, I'm not considering you honest. So in particular, that means that to get the guarantees, you must have connectivity. Yeah. Okay. So here's the rest of the protocol. So I start from certifying. I wait 2 delta. At t plus 2 delta, I ask, is there any block that's two delta potentially certified that conflicts with my block? In other words, I'm asking, is it possible that somebody else certified a conflicting block? Or if somebody else certified it, then I must classify it at least as two delta potentially certified. So this is more permissible, so maybe I hold too much now, so I'm gonna have to be careful about my liveness. But I'm careful enough to satisfy consistency here, because if there's no conflict, if there's no block that conflicts two delta and potentially certified, then I'm sure that nobody else could certify something that's conflicting. Yeah. If there's no conflict, I can finalize. If there is conflict, I hold. Yeah? Recovery will come in.
Sorry, what hard means?
So, just here.
Then what if you will drop this block? Or drop
So
the block B?
you don't finalize this block. If there's other blocks that you were in the middle of finalizing, you'll go through all the steps.
Right.
Yeah.
So this block B is no longer certified by this block.
It's not finalized.
Not certified, right?
It's gonna still have the label of certified, but it wouldn't matter because it's. Because you hold it. And then there's another step that's gonna help me think a bit about recovery. Then wait another two delta after you finalized and hold if you see anybody having a conflict. And now use 4 delta for the conflict. Otherwise, just keep on going. And then you can have a last step that says, ignore everything that conflicts with the block. If I pass the 4 delta mark, I'm sure that everybody must have finalized this block. Now I can ignore any conflicts. I need to be a bit careful about this. So I'm not.
So what is the other option? Like I halted because I'm not sure about B, right? Or something. I halted, I certified B, but
Yeah.
I didn't finalize it. The other option would be that there's another fork that I would accept instead of B. Is that
No, it's
I would eventually confirm it always if it's certified or not.
either it's the unique block of the heart. So I should also say that certified says your K deep in the longest chain.
Right.
Yeah. So if you see some block that's K deep but not in the longest chain, that's not a problem. That's like for Nakamoto, it's not a problem. If you see something that's in the longest chain and K deep, it either gets finalized or you won't.
And then you halt until at some point it will get finalized.
No, you just hold. That's it. You're done. Yeah, I'm gonna talk about recovery, but recovery is gonna be a different step. Like think of like we just detected that Nakamoto got attacked. Stop. Yeah, and wait for like something to resolve this. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you can think of this as just this is where Nakamoto finalizes. Wait a bit before finalizing, and then you can think of like waiting a bit more, and then you can keep on going and so on. If you hold at any point you're in here, it's basically very close to consistency attack on Bitcoin. You detected 2 blocks that are K deep in the longest chain simultaneously. And proof the proof that this works for online nodes gives you synchrony liveness for online nodes is basically very similar to the proof for Nakamoto plus the conflict resolution. So, but again, always consistency. Always consistency. Let me just stop. Always consistency is basically just that I am able to detect conflicts. There's node I and node J, and they're trying to finalize conflicting block. One of them must have heard of the other block in time to hold. So that's a contradiction. So you cannot have 2 honest nodes finalizing conflicting blocks. the 2 delta delay, make sure that we know somebody else could have done something with it. The other part is that if we have sufficient honest majority, which is essentially the network of honest majority that you need for Bitcoin for the Komodo, then you get consistency and liveness, because given the honest majority, you never get those conflicting chains. Like the proof for consistency of Bitcoin says you should never get 2 conflicting blocks that are both K deep in the longest chain.
What is sufficient honest majority?
So the technical thing is network aware. So how much, like there's a slide that I had a while back where the majority only depends on the network delay.
Right, right.
Yeah, so you need to discount the honest majority by the network delay because of the blocks that are going to be mined simultaneously. And that's kind of honest majority. And there's a bit of a, I think I have this on the slide here. So the proof for why the stubborn Komodo has liveness is almost the same, but there's a bit of an issue because the 2 delta window. So you don't need to get exactly the consistency violation of the Komodo, you just need to get close to that. So you can be within 2 delta. You didn't cause the consistency violation, but within the 2 delta safety range, we allow that would look like a consistency violation. And like the proof just goes through the original proof carefully and shows that if you add those 2 delta window, it doesn't really matter. It's like giving the attacker a 2 delta head start. Asymptotically, it's meaningless. Yeah. Okay, so consistency and liveness for online nodes, good. What about late joiners? Yeah. So we have 2 problems now. What do we do about late joiners and how do we recover from attacks? Late joiners are super tricky, basically because of the split brain problem, which is kind of inherent in an open system. Like the attacker can always create a conflicting copy of the ledger and always try to trick the late joiners to join the other copy. If I have honest majority, I basically say, well, I can, there's 1 copy. Without it, there's nothing preventing the attacker from making multiple copies. But a lot of the impossibility results that we have previously in ledger, I think you had a talk just next week, a great talk just about this paper, right? Then you get an impossibility result for distinguishing Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash. Because you can think of, I start a fork of Bitcoin without any intention to deceive anybody. I just made another fork of Bitcoin. You can think of this as an attack. I just start mining another chain. And now impossibility results will say, well, users cannot distinguish what is the Bitcoin chain versus the Bitcoin Cash chain. And it seems like a bit paradoxical, right? In practice, users can tell the difference and are able to detect which is Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash. And in particular, Bitcoin cannot destroy Bitcoin Cash by just mining a longer chain. You cannot say nobody will be able to find your chain because our chain is longer. It doesn't work that way, right? Like people will just go online and have some out of protocol resource that will connect them to the chain anyway, and that resource will tell them how to find the right fork. So I'm going to think of the recovery oracle as kind of trying to capture this kind of information. Okay? So first, like, okay, those are pretty, in some sense sensible, in some sense weak results. That like late joiners are fine as long as there wasn't an attack. Or you can reread those as saying if the late joiners just are aware of that, whether an attack happened and they should hold on to an attack, they should also be fine. But let's talk about the actual recovery. Yeah. Not doing well on time. So can we recover? and you regain the honest majority. So let me just jump to the definition of the recoverable code. So remember that like in the original protocol, we had two steps. You certify and then you finalize. The fact that you have two steps also says that I know something about all the blocks that could potentially be finalized by anybody. They must have been certified first. And more than that, they must have been clearly certified. When this block certified, when the miner certified the block, they must have not seen any conflicts. But otherwise, it wouldn't have finalized. So I would say, set up an entity called a recovery oracle. That what this entity would do is update the setup of the protocol, essentially telling you a new Genesis block. And the challenge in this Genesis block is to make sure that it's consistent with all the blocks that could have been finalized by any honest node. To do that, I'm going to ask that it extends any block that was being certified by any node. That could be any node. Okay. And now the main lemma that I would use is if some honest node finalizes the block, all honest nodes need certified. I went to the two steps, certified I didn't see any conflict. It means that 2 steps ago, others must have certified and they could not have seen any conflict either. I know that. I'm going to use this knowledge to say, now this is all that you need to know. So now basically it says that the recovery oracle can be implemented by just asking one honest node to provide this input. I don't need to know the entire state of the system. I don't need to know the view of all the nodes. I can have something that's simple to implement, feasible, and also something that's, I would argue, I guess I would not because I don't have much time, but does not give too much power because it's only activated after a costly attack by an attacker, because the attacker will have to make a chain that will get thrown away by the new Genesis block. Okay. So the result is suppose that I have honest majority after time t, and at time t I call the recovery oracle. Then I have consistency at any time, and liveness after time t. And this is true for late joiners too, where the recovery oracle is this out-of-protocol entity that resolves the split brain problem for the late joiner. Okay, so I guess I'm out of time. Yeah. There's some comments of proof of stake that basically has the same kind of tension because it's the same split brain problems. There's some comments in the paper. There's a lot of better things in proof of stake. Accountability is great. But let me just kind of say, like the high level, we kept the high level kind of like thoughts that we had. We try to come up with an economic property that we would like to have for the protocol. We want to do the distributed systems model, and like the recovery oracle is our attempt to kind of slightly change it to get what we think are the plausible results. And from this exercise, I think that it is actually plausible to get something that reconciles complete re-entry with safety, with some caveat that you need some resilience, some reliance on the community. That's kind of like essential for resolving this brain, and I think it practically feasible. And given those two things, I think this is just the first step. Because if you want to actually design financial rails that leverage this technology for something useful, there's a lot of other properties that you would like to have, but this security is probably the starting point, because without security, you can't do it. So I put 2 examples here of the centralized organization that achieve great and want to avoid, and that you guess which is which. And thank you so much.
So what's when you say role of the community, do you have some assumption that it's a majority? I mean, by community, you are saying the other nodes are cooperating with following the protocol. So in that sense, what's the difference between the notion of a community versus the honest node following the protocol?
So I wanna. I wanna think of a system that is fairly decentralized. Ideally, I would like everything to be completely anonymous, like no reliance on outside forces. Kind of thinking that somebody can spin a lot of miners or nodes in some form and have a great effect. That's kind of a scenario that's really important. On the other hand, like when I kind of think of the possibility result and I think of this kind of split brain where somebody tricks everybody to use a different fork, that seems to ignore the fact that people Google Bitcoin Cash to figure out how to connect to Bitcoin Cash. And there's some reliance of all those systems on having a website that explains the protocol and people can download the software from, having some developer community, having some consortium. So I kind of want this in a model too. And maybe one more concrete way is like the Wi-Fi Alliance and the Wi-Fi manufacturers. And there's a distinction between the two. Like you may be happy to designate a group of engineers to design the protocol and sit in a room and have like a lot of power for the protocol. But after they're done with the work and they publish this, they have very little power with the protocol and all the different manufacturers can do whatever they want. Like you have a sense of free entry in that and lack of control.
Let's think this Peter again.